Eth pressed his four-fingered hand against the cold glass of the observation deck. Below him, the planet 7 turned slowly in the darkness of space. It was a small world, covered in blue oceans and green forests, beautiful in its own simple way. And today, it would become a grave. He was a historian of the collective, one of the 12 elder races that ruled the galaxy. His people had traveled between stars for over 50,000 years. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had watched countless young species reach for the heavens, only to fade into dust and memory. Eth had documented many such endings. It was his purpose, his calling. He recorded the deaths of civilizations so that others might learn from their failures. But this assignment was different. This time, he had come to witness something special, the end of humanity. The observation station Eternal Witness hung in high orbit, far from the coming battle. It was a vessel, built for watching and recording, not for fighting. From here, Eth could see everything that was about to happen, and what was about to happen would be magnificent. 10,000 warships filled the space around 7. They came from all 12 elder races, the greatest fleet ever assembled in living memory. Dominion vessels of every shape and size formed a wall of metal and fire around the small planet, dreadnoughts the size of cities, carriers that held thousands of fighters, destroyers with weapons that could crack moons. All of them had come for one purpose: to end the human threat forever. Eth activated his recording device and spoke in his native tongue. On this day, the aberration called humanity meets its end. Let this record serve as a lesson to any species that would disturb the order of the cosmos. He believed every word. How could he not? The humans were young, barely 300 years into their expansion among the stars. They were primitive by elder race standards, still using technology that they had abandoned ago. They had no great fleet, no ancient wisdom, no understanding of their place in the galaxy. And that was precisely the problem. Eth moved to his data terminal and pulled up the files on humanity. He had studied them extensively before this mission. The more he learned, the more he understood why the Dominion had decided they must be destroyed. Humans were chaos, pure, uncontrolled chaos. They did not respect the old ways. They did not accept their place at the bottom of the galactic order. When the elder races told them to stay within their borders, humans pushed outward anyway. When they were told that certain technologies were forbidden, they invented new ones. When they were warned that some questions should never be asked, they asked them louder. But worse than their defiance was their influence. Worlds that traded with humans began to change. Species that had been content under Dominion rule for thousands of years started to question their masters. Slaves began to dream of freedom. The weak began to hope for better lives. Humanity spread ideas like a disease, and those ideas threatened everything the elder races had built. The Dominion had tried other methods first: economic pressure, political isolation, small military actions to remind humans of their weakness. None of it worked. The humans simply adapted and pushed back harder. They made friends with other young species. They formed alliances with races the Dominion had dismissed as unimportant. They kept growing, kept spreading, kept changing things. So the elder races made their decision. Humanity would be erased. Not conquered, not controlled, but completely destroyed. Every colony burned, every ship broken, every human dead. It was the only way to restore order. Eth felt no guilt about this. It was simply the natural way of things. The strong ruled. The weak obeyed or died. Humanity had refused to obey, and now they would die. The historian would record their end, and future species would learn from their example. He looked back at the viewport and studied the human fleet. 300 ships, perhaps 350 if he counted the smaller vessels. They floated in a tight formation around 7, the last human colony in this sector of space. The rest had already fallen. Billions of humans had died in the past year as the Dominion swept through their territory. These were the survivors, the final remnants of a failed species. They had nowhere to run. The Dominion fleet surrounded them completely. No escape routes, no allies coming to save them, no hope of victory. Any reasonable species would surrender. Any sane commander would try to negotiate for the lives of their civilians, even if it meant slavery. But as Eth watched, he noticed something strange. The human ships were not moving toward surrender positions. They were not broadcasting peace signals. They were not doing any of the things that dying species normally did. Instead, they held their formation. They waited. They watched the massive fleet that had come to destroy them. And their weapons were powered up. Eth made a small sound of confusion. Surely the humans understood their situation. Surely they could count. 300 ships against 10,000. It was not a battle. It was mathematics. The outcome was already decided. He adjusted his sensors to get a better reading on the human flagship. It was called the Unconquered, a name that seemed almost laughable given the circumstances. The ship was old, clearly damaged from previous battles, held together with repairs that looked rushed and desperate. It should not even be flying. But it was flying, and as Eth watched, he saw lights flickering across its hull, new systems powering up, weapons that his sensors did not recognize, modifications that had been hidden until this moment. A cold feeling began to grow in Eth's stomach. He had seen many species face extinction. Most of them begged. Some of them fought briefly before accepting the end. A few went mad with despair. But he had never seen a species face certain death with such calm purpose. The Dominion fleet began its final approach. The great ships moved forward like a tide of metal, ready to wash away the last traces of human existence. Commanders across the Armada sent the traditional surrender demand: lay down your weapons and accept your fate. The human response came back immediately. It was not words. It was a single image, broadcast across all channels so that every ship in the Dominion fleet would see it. A human hand, the middle finger raised. Eth did not understand the gesture, but his translation systems explained it. He stared at the image for a long moment. Then he began to laugh, though he was not sure why. These creatures were about to die. Their species was about to end, and their final message to their executioners was an insult. Fascinating, Eth said to his recording device. The humans appear to have completely miscalculated their position. They behave as though they have some chance of survival. This is clearly a psychological defense mechanism, a way of denying the reality of their extinction. He believed this. He had to believe this, because the alternative was impossible. The alternative was that the humans knew exactly what they were facing, that they understood the odds perfectly, and that they had chosen to fight anyway. Not because they thought they could win, but because fighting was simply who they were. Eth pushed that thought away. It was ridiculous. No species would choose hopeless battle over survival. It went against every law of nature, every principle of logic, every instinct that evolution had built into living things. But as he watched the human fleet hold its position, as he saw their weapons lock onto targets 10 times their size, as he felt the tension building across the battlefield, Eth began to wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. He had come here to watch humanity die. He was beginning to fear that he might watch something else entirely. Admiral stood on the bridge of the Unconquered and looked at the wall of enemy ships that surrounded her world. 10,000 vessels. The combined might of 12 civilizations that had ruled the stars since before her ancestors had discovered fire. Enough firepower to crack planets, to burn suns, to end everything she had ever known or loved. She smiled. Her crew watched her with eyes full of fear and hope and something else, something that the translator systems of the Dominion would never understand. They were ready. They had been ready for a long time. Admiral, her tactical officer said, "The Dominion fleet is requesting our surrender. Standard terms. We lay down weapons and they promise a quick death." Laughed. It was a warm sound, rich and real, completely wrong for a woman facing extinction. A quick death, how generous of them. She walked to the center of her bridge, where the holographic display showed their hopeless position. 300 human ships, a few million civilians on the planet below, against an empire that stretched across half the galaxy. The numbers were impossible. Any computer would tell you that. Any logical mind would see only one outcome. The elder races had been conquering younger species for 50,000 years. They had perfected the art of destruction. They had never lost, but had not risen to command humanity's last fleet by being logical. She opened a channel to every human ship in the formation. Her voice carried across the void, reaching pilots and gunners and engineers who were saying goodbye to their families, reaching soldiers who had loaded their weapons knowing they would not survive the day, reaching civilians who had refused evacuation because they wanted to die on their feet rather than live on their knees. "They call us chaos," she said. "They say we disturb the natural order. They say we don't belong among the stars." She paused, letting her words sink in. "They gathered the greatest fleet in galactic history to prove that we are nothing, to show the universe that humanity can be crushed like an insect." On the observation station far above, Eth listened to this transmission with growing unease. His translators caught every word, every subtle meaning, but they could not explain the feeling in its voice. It was not despair. It was not fear. It was something his species had no word for. "Look at them," continued. 10,000 ships, 12 ancient races, all of their power, all of their technology, all of their thousands of years of conquest, and they brought all of it here, for us, for 300 ships and a single colony." She let that sink in, and slowly across the human fleet, understanding began to spread. "They're afraid," said. "Not of our ships, not of our weapons. They're afraid of what we represent. They're afraid that if they don't destroy us completely, we'll come back, we'll rebuild, we'll keep spreading our chaos across their perfect, ordered galaxy." She turned to look at the enemy fleet through her viewport. Her eyes were hard as stone. "They're right to be afraid." Thought about the past year, the fall of Earth's colonies one by one, the billions who had died, friends she had lost, family she would never see again. The weight of all that grief should have crushed her. Instead, it had forged her into something new. "We didn't spend these last months waiting to die," she said. "We spent them preparing. Every engineer who could hold a tool worked day and night. Every scientist who had a theory tested it. Every soldier trained until they couldn't stand. We knew this day was coming, and we got ready." On the Unconquered's lower decks, weapons systems hummed with new power. Modified missiles loaded with payloads that broke 17 galactic treaties. Fighter pilots strapped into cockpits that had been upgraded with systems stolen, borrowed, or invented from nothing. Shields that ran on principles the elder races had declared impossible. Humanity had always been good at doing impossible things. "They think this will be quick," said. "They think we'll break and run or surrender or die easily. They've never fought anything like us. They've never faced a species that would rather burn than bow." Eth felt a chill run through his thin body. He had studied humanity's history before this mission. He knew about their wars, their struggles, their endless conflicts with each other. He had thought it proved they were primitive, unable to find peace even among themselves. Now he wondered if he had missed the point entirely. "Today, we show them what humanity really is," said. "We show them why their ancestors learned to fear fire. We show them why predators on Earth learned to run from creatures half their size. We show them what happens when you back a human into a corner." She drew a deep breath. "We're not going to win this battle. I won't lie to you. Most of us won't see tomorrow. But we're going to make them pay for every inch of space. We're going to hurt them so badly that they'll tell stories about this day for 10,000 years. We're going to make sure that every species in the galaxy knows that humanity did not go quietly into the dark." Across the fleet, something changed. Fear didn't disappear, but it transformed. It became fuel for something hotter, something fiercer. Soldiers who had been praying for their souls started praying for good aim instead. Pilots who had been crying stopped crying and started checking their weapons. Engineers who had been mourning started running final diagnostics with steady hands. The Dominion wants to teach the galaxy a lesson today, said. They want to show what happens to species that don't know their place. Well, we're going to teach them a lesson instead. We're going to show them that some species would rather die free than live as slaves. We're going to show them that the universe is bigger than their empire. We're going to show them that hope cannot be killed with guns. She raised her hand, and every ship in the human fleet powered up its weapons at once. For Earth, she said, for everyone we've lost, for everyone who's still fighting somewhere out there, for our children and their children and every generation that will come after us. Her hand fell. Release the storm. The human fleet surged forward, not in retreat, not in surrender, but in attack. 300 ships against 10,000, racing toward their enemies with every weapon blazing. On the observation station, Eth watched in stunned silence. His recording device captured everything, but he had no words to describe what he was seeing. The humans were not trying to escape. They were not trying to survive. They were charging directly at the heart of the Dominion Armada, at the largest concentration of enemy ships. They were attacking. It was madness. It was suicide. It went against every principle of military science, every rule of survival, every logical calculation that any sane species would make. And it was the most terrifying thing Eth had ever seen. Because the humans weren't fighting like soldiers. They were fighting like they had nothing left to lose. They were fighting like death was not the worst thing that could happen to them. They were fighting like people who had decided that today, the universe was going to remember their names. The first missiles struck the Dominion line, and the storm began. The battle was not supposed to happen this way. Eth gripped the edge of his console as the observation station shook from the distant explosions. His sensors showed him everything: the positions of every ship, the trajectory of every missile, the death of every vessel that burned and broke in the void. But his mind could not process what his eyes were seeing. The humans were not dying, not quickly anyway, not the way they were supposed to. The first hour of battle had followed the expected pattern. The Dominion fleet had advanced in perfect formation, thousands of years of military tradition guiding every movement. Their weapons had filled space with fire. Human ships had exploded. The mathematical certainty of extinction had begun to unfold. But then something changed. A human destroyer, its shields failing and its hull burning, had not tried to escape. Instead, it had accelerated directly toward a Dominion dreadnought. The massive Elder race vessel had fired everything it had, tearing the destroyer apart piece by piece. But the human ship kept coming. Its crew was dying, its systems were failing, but someone was still at the controls. Someone kept the engines burning until the very last moment. The destroyer struck the dreadnought at full speed. Both ships died together. Eth had stared at his screen in disbelief. The destroyer could have tried to flee. It could have saved its crew, or at least some of them. Instead, its captain had chosen to trade one human ship for one Dominion dreadnought. That was when Eth realized the humans were not trying to survive the battle. They were trying to make it cost. The human tactics made no sense by any standard Eth knew. They did not hold formations. They did not protect their flanks. They did not retreat when outnumbered. Instead, they fought like wild animals, each ship acting independently but somehow coordinating perfectly. They found gaps in the Dominion lines that should not have existed. They exploited weaknesses that the elder races had never needed to fix. A group of human frigates would dive toward a carrier, drawing fire from dozens of defenders. The frigates would die, but while the Dominion ships were focused on them, a single human bomber would slip through and put a missile into the carrier's engine. The carrier would explode, taking its fighters with it. one human bomber for one Dominion carrier, and 300 fighters. The mathematics of it horrified Eth. The humans were winning trades that no species should accept. They were dying in numbers that should have broken any military force, but they kept fighting, they kept coming, and they kept finding new ways to make the Dominion pay. The elder race commanders began to panic. Eth could hear their communications on his diplomatic channels. The proud admirals of 12 ancient civilizations were screaming at each other. This was supposed to be simple. This was supposed to be clean. Why were they losing so many ships? Why wouldn't the humans just die properly? The answer came from the human fleet itself. Eth watched a human medical frigate charge through a battle line. Medical ships did not fight. Every civilization in the galaxy knew that. Medical ships rescued the wounded and stayed away from combat. But this ship had run out of wounded to rescue. Its doctors and nurses were dead. Its patients had died in their beds when a Dominion strike had torn through the medical bay. And the captain, a woman whose name Eth would never know, had decided that her ship still had one mission left. The medical frigate rammed a Dominion command vessel. As it struck, its crew broadcast a single word across all channels: remember. That word echoed through the human fleet. Every surviving ship heard it. Every pilot, every gunner, every soldier who was still breathing heard their fallen comrade's final message. And they fought harder. Eth did not understand it. His species fought with cold logic. War was calculation. You measured your forces against the enemy's forces, you determined the optimal strategy, and you executed it with precision. Emotion had no place in combat. But the humans fought with everything. They fought with rage at the friends they had lost. They fought with love for the families they were protecting. They fought with hope that somehow, against all odds, something they did would matter. They wept as they fired their weapons. They laughed as they dodged enemy missiles. They sang old songs from Earth as they flew into certain death. It was beautiful, it was terrifying, it was completely, utterly insane. 6 hours into the battle, the Dominion had lost over 3,000 ships. The humans had lost 200. By the mathematics of war, the Dominion was winning easily. They still had 7,000 vessels against humanity's remaining 100. But the elder race admirals were not celebrating. 3,000 ships, in 6 hours, against a primitive species with outdated technology and no hope of survival. The Dominion had conquered entire civilizations with smaller losses. They had ruled the galaxy without facing casualties like this. And the humans showed no signs of stopping. Eth watched a human pilot eject from his destroyed fighter, floating in the void with nothing but an emergency suit. A Dominion cruiser moved toward him, probably intending to capture him for interrogation. The pilot detonated himself. The explosion was tiny, meaningless in the scale of the battle, but Eth understood the message. The humans would not be taken. They would not surrender. They would not give the Dominion the satisfaction of prisoners or trophies. Every human in this battle had decided that death was preferable to defeat. The historian had studied thousands of species in his long career. He had watched civilizations rise and fall, had recorded the last days of peoples who had once ruled star systems. He thought he understood how extinction worked. But he had never seen anything like this. The humans were dying. They were definitely dying. Their fleet was broken, their ships burning, their people falling by the thousands. Nothing could change that. But they were dying on their own terms. They were dying with weapons in their hands and curses on their lips. They were dying as they had lived, defiant and chaotic, and absolutely refusing to accept the universe as it was. And in their dying, they were teaching the Dominion something new. They were teaching the elder races that some species could not be conquered. Some peoples would not bow, no matter what forces were arrayed against them. Some civilizations would rather burn themselves to ash than submit to a comfortable slavery. Eth stopped recording. He sat back in his chair and watched the battle unfold, his historical objectivity crumbling around him. He had come here to document an ending. Instead, he was watching something else entirely. He was watching 12 ancient empires discover, for the first time in their long histories, what it meant to fight an enemy who was not afraid to die. He was watching the cosmos learn fear. 12 hours into the battle, Admiral was still alive. Her ship was not. The Unconquered had taken 17 direct hits, lost half its crew, and was running on emergency power. Fires burned in the lower decks. The medical bay had run out of supplies hours ago. The bridge was lit only by the glow of failing displays and the distant explosions outside. But was still alive, and so were 47 other human ships, scattered across the battlefield like broken teeth. She looked at the tactical display, updating slowly as systems struggled to function. The Dominion still had nearly 7,000 vessels. Humanity had started with 300 and now had less than 50. By any measure, the battle was over. But the Dominion was not advancing. The great armada that had swept across human space, destroying colony after colony with terrible efficiency, had stopped. Their perfect formations had broken apart as ships rushed to fill gaps left by fallen comrades. Their coordinated attacks had become scattered and confused. Their commanders, so confident just 12 hours ago, were arguing with each other across open channels. Listen to those arguments with grim satisfaction. The Dominion admirals were blaming each other for the losses. Some wanted to retreat and regroup. Others demanded more aggressive tactics. A few were calling for reinforcements from the core worlds. Reinforcements, to finish off 47 human ships. Began to laugh. It hurt to laugh. Her ribs were probably broken, and there was blood in her mouth that she tried not to think about. But she laughed anyway, because the sound of ancient powers calling for help against her broken fleet was the funniest thing she had ever heard. Her communications officer looked up from his damaged console. "Admiral, I'm receiving a priority transmission from the entire enemy fleet. They're demanding our surrender again." "Same terms as before." "No, ma'am. They're offering to let the civilians evacuate. Safe passage to neutral space. All they want is our surrender and the destruction of our remaining ships." Considered this. It was a better offer than before. The Dominion had never shown mercy to any species they had marked for extinction. The fact that they were offering anything showed how badly the battle had shaken them. She could take the deal, save a few million lives, let humanity survive, scattered and broken but alive. But she thought about all the species the Dominion had destroyed all the civilizations that had surrendered and been erased anyway. All the peoples who had trusted the elder race's promises and paid with everything they had. And she thought about the message that surrender would send to the rest of the galaxy. "Open a channel," she said, "broadcast to the entire Dominion fleet, and make sure every other species in sensor range can hear this too." Her communications officer hesitated, then nodded. "Channel open, Admiral." Straightened in her chair. Pain shot through her body, but she ignored it. She was about to give the most important speech of her life, and she would not deliver it slouching. "Attention, Dominion Fleet. This is Admiral of the human vessel Unconquered. I have received your surrender terms." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "I have a counteroffer." On the observation station far above, Eth leaned forward, his recording device capturing every word. "You came here to end us," continued. "You gathered the greatest military force in galactic history to exterminate a single colony, and now, 12 hours later, you're requesting reinforcements. Think about that. Really think about it." Her voice hardened. "Look at what it's costing you to kill us. Count your dead, count your burning ships, count the gaps in your perfect formations, and then ask yourself a question." She stood up from her captain's chair, facing the viewport where the enemy fleet hung in the darkness. "What would it cost to fight our Our core systems. The 90 billion humans you thought you could threaten into submission. The Dominion channels went quiet. Every admiral, every captain, every soldier in that massive fleet was listening. You came here expecting a quick execution, said. Instead, you've been fighting for half a day against a handful of outdated ships, and you're losing. Oh, you'll win eventually. You'll kill us all sooner or later, but you've already lost 3,000 ships against 300. She let the numbers hang in the air. We're not a chaos variable. We're a promise. Hurt us, and we will make you bleed for every drop. Come for our children, and we will tear down your empires stone by stone. Kill our worlds, and we will haunt your nightmares for eternity. Eth watched as something shifted in the Dominion formation. Ships that had been advancing slowly stopped moving. Weapons that had been charging powered down. The great fleet that had seemed so unstoppable now looked uncertain. You wanted to teach the galaxy a lesson today, said. Congratulations. You've taught them. You've taught them that humanity doesn't kneel. You've taught them that the mighty Dominion can be hurt. You've taught them that the elder races are not as powerful as they pretend to be. She smiled, and even through the grainy video transmission, Eth could see the fire in her eyes. So here's my counteroffer. You can keep fighting us. You can destroy these last 47 ships and burn 7 to ash, but you will never have peace. Every human who survives today will dedicate their life to fighting you. Every child born in refugee camps will grow up learning your names and swearing vengeance. We will be the shadow that haunts your empire until the stars burn out. She leaned forward. Or you can let the evacuation ships go. Let our civilians escape, and we'll stay here and die fighting, buying them time with our lives. You'll get your victory. You'll get to tell the galaxy that you destroyed the human fleet, but you'll also know in your hearts that you couldn't finish what you started. The Dominion fleet was silent. Eth could see their formation shifting, ships moving uncertainly as commanders debated their options. The choice is yours, said, but choose quickly, because in about 10 minutes we're going to attack again, and this time we're going for your flagships. She cut the transmission. For a long moment, nothing happened. The battlefield hung suspended, thousands of ships waiting to see what would happen next. Then slowly, a gap opened in the Dominion formation, a corridor of empty space leading away from the planet toward neutral territory. Eth watched in disbelief as evacuation ships began to rise from 7. Civilian transports, packed with millions of human refugees, flew toward the gap. The Dominion ships let them pass. The humans had not won. Their fleet was destroyed. Their colony would be burned. Most of their soldiers would die in the next few hours of fighting. But they had saved their people, and they had broken something in the Dominion that could never be repaired. Eth understood now. The humans had never expected to survive this battle. They had only expected to make it matter. And they had. Oh, how they had. 6 months had passed since the Battle of 7. Eth sat alone in his private quarters on the, surrounded by data files and recordings and memories he could not escape. Outside his window, the ancient spires of his civilization reached toward the sky, monuments to 50,000 years of achievement. Once, those spires had filled him with pride. Now they only reminded him of how fragile empires really were. He had submitted his official report weeks ago. It said everything the collective wanted to hear. The human threat had been contained. The colony at 7 had been destroyed. The Dominion had achieved its objectives with acceptable losses. Acceptable losses. Eth laughed bitterly at the phrase. 4,000 Dominion ships had been destroyed in the battle. 4,000 vessels, crewed by soldiers from 12 elder races. The greatest military defeat in galactic history, and the official reports called it acceptable. But the truth was worse than the numbers. 3 of the 12 elder races had quietly withdrawn from the Dominion in the months since 7. Their admirals had seen what the humans could do, and they wanted no part of the war to come. The remaining 9 races were arguing constantly, blaming each other for the failures, demanding that someone else send ships to hunt down the surviving humans. Because humans had survived. The evacuation ships had escaped. Millions of human refugees had scattered across neutral space, welcomed by species that had once feared the Dominion's power. Those refugees were not broken or defeated. They were angry. They were organizing, and they were telling their story to anyone who would listen. Eth had intercepted some of those transmissions. The footage from Seven had spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Young species who had spent centuries under Dominion rule were watching human ships charge against impossible odds. They were hearing Admiral's speech, translated into 1,000 languages. They were learning a word that the elder races had tried to stamp out. Hoping. The Dominion had wanted to make an example of humanity. Instead, they had created a legend. In taverns and markets across 100 worlds, people whispered about the species that had refused to surrender. They talked about the 47 ships that had held off 7,000. They repeated words like a prayer. We are humanity, and we do not go quietly into the dark. Ev activated his personal recording device. Not the official one that fed reports to the collective, but a private unit that he had hidden from his superiors. This record would never be approved. It would probably get him executed if anyone found it. He did not care. I was sent to document humanity's extinction, he said. I was told that I would witness the death of a chaos species, a dangerous aberration that threatened galactic order. I expected to record their destruction and return home with a warning for future generations. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Instead, I witnessed something I do not have words for. The humans call it many things: courage, defiance, love, spirit. These translations are inadequate. Our language has no term for what I saw because our species has never experienced it. Eth stood and walked to his window. The city spread out below him, beautiful and ancient and suddenly very small. The Dominion believed that power comes from ships and weapons and the accumulation of resources over time. We believed that the old should rule the young, that order should be preserved, that change was dangerous. These beliefs have guided our civilizations for. He turned back to his recording device. We were wrong. The words felt strange in his mouth. Heresy of the highest order, truth of the deepest kind. Human power does not come from their ships. Their fleet was outdated and outnumbered. It does not come from their weapons. We had better technology in every way. It does not come from their history or their wisdom or their resources. They are younger than most species we have conquered. He sat down heavily, suddenly feeling very old. Human power comes from something inside them, a fire that does not go out, a refusal to accept the unacceptable. They looked at the greatest fleet in galactic history and decided that they would rather die fighting than live surrendering. And in that decision, they became something more than flesh and blood and metal. Eth thought about Admiral. He had learned that she had died in the final hours of the battle, leading the last charge against the Dominion flagships. Her ship had been torn apart by enemy fire, but she had taken 3 dreadnoughts with her, and her final transmission had been a single word: forward. The cosmos fears human power, Eth said, but it misunderstands its nature. It is not their capacity for violence that makes them dangerous. Many species can destroy. It is their capacity to care. They love so fiercely that death becomes acceptable if it protects what matters. They hope so stubbornly that logic cannot defeat them. They rage against injustice not because they believe they will win, but because rage is the only worthy response to evil. He pulled up a map of the galaxy on his display. Human space was marked in red, showing the territories they had lost. But scattered across the map were thousands of small dots, places where human refugees had found shelter. The Dominion believes they have won. They have destroyed human colonies and scattered human survivors, but they have not destroyed humanity. They have only taught the humans what the galaxy truly is and given them a reason to change it. Eth began copying his recording to 100 different data caches. He would hide them across the galaxy, in places where future generations might find them. Maybe someone would listen. Maybe someone would understand. "I came to witness an ending," he said, his voice growing soft. "Instead, I saw a beginning. The beginning of something the elder races cannot stop. The beginning of a change that will sweep across the stars like fire." He thought about all the young species watching, all the oppressed peoples hopping, all the slaves dreaming of freedom. He thought about what would happen when they realized that the Dominion could be hurt, that the old order could be challenged. That hope was not just a feeling, but a weapon. "I used to believe in the natural order of things. The strong ruled, the weak served. That was how it had always been and how it would always be." Eth smiled, the expression strange on his alien face. "The humans have shown me something different. They have shown me that the universe does not belong to the strong or the old or the powerful. It belongs to those who refuse to give up, to those who fight for what they love, to those who would rather burn than bow." He reached out and ended his recording. "I saw humanity storm and I learned why the cosmos fears their power." He saved the file and sat in silence for a long moment. Then Eth, historian of the collective, witness to the Battle of Seven, did something he had never done in his long career. He began to hope.